you should be seeing this slide. I'm going to do an introduction in a second here, but we started this process well over a year ago. Dan and Jesse asked if I would come and do the in-person training, and I'll talk about that in just a second here. But I knew from the very beginning that I really liked this as a title and as a description. Psst, can you keep a secret? And many of the libraries that I work with are small town libraries, and that can be really difficult. And so I want to kind of acknowledge that as we move through here. So again, I'd like to say thanks to Dan and Jesse for the invitation to talk, and I really was looking forward to meeting you guys all in person last year, but I'm happy to be here this morning. As Dan said, my name is Becky Heil, and I have worked with the state library for about the last 10 years. So Dan and I must have started working for libraries about the same time. And as he said, I've got 22 counties and 93 libraries in my district, and I spend a lot of time on the road. I have a very large district, and a lot of my time is spent in travel. I love consulting and teaching and traveling as well, so this job has really been very perfect for me. I became a grandma for the first time just after the world shut down last year. So I've been spending as much time as possible with my granddaughter, Poppy. She isn't really talking yet, so she's really good at keeping secrets. So what's up for today? Library privacy and confidentiality is what I was asked to talk about today. And as I was kind of working through that, I like to do a little bit of interactive pieces when I do presentations. And in person, I had a great idea how we were going to manage that. When we switched to online, I really went back and forth with how exactly that was going to happen. My family convinced me that we could do a video. So that's going to come a little bit later on, and we'll have some examples of bad secret keeping during that part. But I also want to talk about why this idea of keeping library records private is important. And I've kind of narrowed it to three things. Society wants us to, and we'll talk through some of the things that I found about that. There are certainly legal implications as well as ethical implications as librarians and as trustees. And then at the end, I want to talk about, all right, so now we know that this is important. How do we do it exactly? We often use the terms confidentiality and privacy interchangeably in our everyday lives, but I discovered they mean distinctly different things from a legal perspective. In terms of information, privacy refers to the freedom from intrusion into one's personal matters. Privacy is about the person. Privacy is essential to free inquiry in the library because it enables users to select, access, and use information without the fear of embarrassment, judgment, surveillance, punishment, or ostracism. If library users are truly to be free to make individual choices about what they read and view, they must have a reasonable expectation that their library use will be kept confidential. Confidentiality is the right of the individual to have control over how his personal information is collected, used, and/or disclosed. Confidentiality is more about the data. You're probably hearing a lot about PII, or personally identifiable information, today. So we want to assure our libraries' confidentiality, and that's the primary means of ensuring them with the privacy that, again, frees that user from the fear that they will experience retaliation or intimidation as a result of reading a book, viewing a website, or consulting any other library resource. While confidentiality is an ethical duty, privacy is rooted in common law, which we'll explore in just a second. So I want you to take a look. I'm going to go out here and cue up this video. I want you to take a look at some of the mistakes that our fictional library staff made. Pay attention to what you see, because I'm going to ask you at the end to tell me what mistakes you saw. So you can put it into chat if that works for you, or you can unmute yourself. We'd love to have you guys raise your hands and just sort of shout out what mistakes you saw during this. As I was showing this to some of my family, they said, you really need one of those big X's that go when everybody makes a mistake in here. We've got 12 short scenes in this video, but I really wanted you all to watch it with a critical eye and see what mistakes you actually found. So let me do this. Whoop. No, that's not it. Oh, I beg your pardon. Somehow or another, my video went away. Nope, there it is. Nope, that's not it. Oh, for crying out loud. I beg your pardon. I'm usually a little bit more organized than this. I'm not sure what happened to that video. All right, there we go. It is very quiet, so you may have to bump up your volume.
Hi, I'd like a library card, please.
Registration forms are right there.
Okay.
Do you? Actually, no, I'll fill it out for you.
Okay.
What is your name?
My name is Carl Russell.
All right, Carl Russell.
2 L's. 2 S's.
2 L's, 2 S's. Okay. And your phone number?
563 867
563. What was it?
867
867
53
5309.
09.
And your address?
300 Drake Street.
300 Drake Street. And your social security number?
572
572
08
08
41
41
24.
24. All right, Carl Russell, you are all set to go. And we will mail you a postcard to save you money, so that way you know what you have overdue.
All right, thank you.
Oh, Megan, I was going to tell you, I can't do lunch the other day. I'm actually going to go have surgery.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. If you need a ride home, just let me know.
Oh,
Hey Megan, I heard at church that Melody has to go to the hospital. Do you think she might need a ride?
Oh, no, I talked to her yesterday. She's just going in for minor surgery. She has the ride home covered.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you're such a great friend.
Excuse me, ma'am? I'm Officer Jenkins with Washington Public High School.
Okay.
We got information that Tyler Burns was skipping class the other day. Do you have any security tapes to confirm those reports?
Yeah, of course. I can just show them to you right back here.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
I'm president of the Friends of the Library. I'm wondering if I could get a list of all the people who've checked out books in the last 3 to 6 months.
I don't think I'm supposed to give out that information. It's personal.
Well, we're running a big fundraiser, and I figured if I could get their names, I could contact them to see if they want to donate money.
I really shouldn't be doing that.
I'm the president of the Friends of the Library. They have to be willing participants here. They would love to give money to us. I just need to know who they are.
I suppose they wouldn't mind. I'll get a report from them and get that to you soon.
Awesome, that'd be great. Thanks.
hi there. Hey, was interested in helping some of the kids out and paying for their fines?
Oh yeah, let me just pull up all the overdues. Oh, that's too bad. Molly has 6 overdue titles. I know her mom just lost her job. That'd be so nice of you. They need all the help they can get.
I want to do that. I want to do that for them.
Hi, can you help me? Yeah, wondering if you can tell me who checked out the latest Kristen Hanna book. I was talking with somebody, I don't really remember who they were, but they told me that I'd really, really like it, and I'd love to get it from them after they've read it.
Okay, yeah, sure. Let me check that. Okay, looks like it was Emily Conley. Makes sense. She loves Kristen Hanna. You could probably get it the next time you see her. I think she goes to the same church as you.
Oh, great, okay, thank you so much, appreciate it.
Kate, you're late. What's it this time?
Well, Jack, he missed the bus, so I had to bring him to school.
Well, this is the last time. This has got to stop. If you do it again, we're going to have to let you go.
Library, this is Megan. Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Ethan, your mom's on the phone. I think she wants you to come home.
Excuse me?
Yes?
I need some information on how to get out of debt. Do you have any books about that?
You're looking for information to get out of debt? Okay.
Hi,
doing a report for school, and it's supposed to be on suicide. Can you tell me if he's checked out any books on suicide?
Okay, let me check.
Hey, can I use one of those computers back there?
Yeah, just sign in on the sheet.
Awesome.
All right, what's their name?
His name is Chris Washington.
And you're sure he's doing a report? Okay, let me check and see what I can find. Oh yeah, he checked out a couple of books on suicide just a little bit ago.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Library, Megan speaking. Is this really the FBI? You are? Okay, you want me to find out everyone who was on the computer at 3 to 6 last night? Okay, yeah, let me just look at the signage. Oh yeah, he was very suspicious. His name was David Peterson. Yeah, you're welcome.
Excuse me.
Yeah?
Did you let my 8-year-old son check out the movie Poltergeist?
What's his name?
Ethan Lyle?
Oh yeah, he did check it out, but it's our policy that the parents should monitor their children's viewing.
I would prefer that he not watch the PG movies anymore, and since I'm his mom, I would like you to stop him from doing that. And I would also like you to stop him from playing games on the computers here at the library.
Okay, well I guess since you're his mom, then we'll add a note to his record and say that he can't check out those PG-rated movies, and we'll watch him to make sure he's not playing those violent games anymore.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, Becky, it looks like we definitely had some people starting to put some things into the chat,
Oh, good.
talking about personal information out loud. I know was one of the first things I saw come in through the chat. And then asking for a list of patrons. That seemed to be a common thread.
Other things that anybody saw? And I'm happy to have you unmute and say them out loud. I hope you recognize some of those as mistakes. If not, you'll learn something through through the rest of this.
All right, we're unmuted now. Hi, Becky. This is Williamsburg,
Hi.
and we did see quite a few things. Now, I have a career in the Mesa Police Department, and I saw a lot of stuff that you just don't do.
Good.
I mean, you know, asking for permission, and then the FBI call. I mean, the FBI wouldn't call her at the library.
Actually, with the Patriot Act, that has happened in libraries.
Oh, it shouldn't. Yeah.
It shouldn't. You're absolutely right.
And then, of course, people going behind her and in the area where it's supposed to be the library personnel, they're not supposed to be back there, and they're not supposed to be disciplining employees back there out in the open for everybody to hear.
Perfect. That was a great one. Thanks for catching that. Anything else you saw?
Virginia, what else?
Oh, there were lots of them. Oh, when the guy filled out his application, he should have filled it out himself, and she shouldn't have been announcing all his personal information
Yes.
out loud to anybody in the library to hear.
Yep, exactly. That's what that one was all about.
Yeah. And then the fundraiser. I mean, excuse me? You don't give out that kind of information to people just because they want to get, you know, they want a fundraiser to gain money.
That's right. Yeah, I loved his reasoning. Well, surely if they checked out books, they must want to give us money too.
That don't happen.
We hope that doesn't happen.
Right.
Maybe we better let somebody else talk.
Becky, there was a question about the whole, I think the mother scenario and,
Yeah.
and talking about her child. And so it was, you know, what are the children's rights? And Robin from Neckles had posted about the ALA Bill of Rights, which I think you'll probably get into here in a while.
Yes.
But just mentioning that your children have a right to privacy, just like any of us full-grown adults have.
Exactly. And that is really tough. I would say some of the questions I get the most often when we talk about this is from librarians who are dealing with a parent calls in and their 8-year-old has checked out a bunch of books. They got an overdue notice that the books are overdue. The parent probably signed that library card and they call and they say, I want to know the list of books that my kid had so that I can go look for them. That seems like a very innocuous request. And as a librarian, we want to give that parent that information. I always ask people to think about it. There's a sentence in here a little bit later on about, we're not trying to catch people doing something bad. We're protecting everybody. And I think that's what it comes to here. If you go back to the one scenario where the mother comes in and asks about her older son, probably, who is doing a paper on suicide. And the librarian just says, yep, he checked out books on suicide. Imagine if you're that child and it wasn't a paper on suicide, but that is something you were dealing with on your own and you're not ready to have that conversation with your parents. For the librarian to give that information to that mother really violates that child's privacy. So that's what I sort of remind people is we protect it at all levels in order to protect those people that really need it. And that's where the child piece comes in. And I really liked the librarian's first response to the one about, not letting the kid play violent video games and making sure he doesn't check out PG rated movies. That is the parent's responsibility. It's different when this is a school library. The schools have the ability to say, while you are here, we get to decide what you do and what you don't do. Libraries, public libraries do not have that responsibility, nor do they have that right. We want to put that back on the parents. If you don't want your child watching PG movies, then when they bring it home, you need to check what they're watching. That's not the library's responsibility. So anybody have other things? I'm thinking there were a few.
One
Yep,
thing that I noticed that is a personal, I don't know, pet peeve of mine was the checking to see if the kid was in the building. You have no
Yes.
idea if that's the parent on the other end. You might be confirming that a child is there to a predator. And that's
Absolutely.
something that, you think you're doing a favor for somebody, but you're not.
Yeah, yeah.
Becky, I have a question. This is Sarah Thiel from Lawrence. The thing about the checking out a child checking out books on suicide, it would seem like there might be more there than, I mean, if there was a child who was contemplating suicide possibly and checking out books and the parents did not know, but the library did know, I mean, is there some sort of anything like on the books, like for, abuse, if you see abuse, you need to report it. Is there any kind of thing that the library would indeed have some kind of responsibility to report something like that? I mean, I understand the privacy, but at the same time with something like that, I just kind of wonder if there's any other thing one could do.
I have struggled with this. Librarians are not mandatory reporters under the law. So with abuse, we don't have that same requirement that other officials do. And so that, we don't have that. But personally, it's really difficult for that. I would sort of turn this over. We've had this discussion many times. There's nothing that I'm aware of that I have come across that says, yes, in these instances, you can do this. My guess would be if you feel there's an imminent threat, it's time to, whether it's, a professional or, a police or a parent, I think as an individual, you need to make that decision if you feel like you need to take that elsewhere. But I would sort of throw this out to some of the other NECL staff. Have you guys had these conversations as well?
These things kind of come up occasionally. This is Robin. Sorry, I realized I forgot to mention that earlier. These things come up occasionally, but they're more, situation by situation. I don't know, as we've had a training like this that really deals with that. So this is really valuable.
I think we all struggle with that question. Luckily, it doesn't happen very often. but that doesn't mean it's not a difficult decision when the time comes. And like I said, I'm unaware of anything that's out there that gives real concrete guidance. I think, Robin, you're right, that sort of case by case is the best way, on an individual basis is the best way to handle that. Anybody else
This is
have?
Jessie with Nichols.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this might even delve into mental health first aid a little bit as well. I know, at least in Lawrence, Bert and Ash, they used to offer some mental health first aid training, and it kind of delves into this a little bit when you can tell that a person is in crisis. And it was a couple of years ago that I had this training, so it might have been updated since. But they were stating that you really know that a person is contemplating suicide, or has the intent when they have a plan, when they know what they're going to do. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean maybe waiting till that point, but it does seem, just because someone is checking out those books doesn't necessarily mean that they're planning to do that, or to cause self-harm. So like Becky was saying, you are, sorry, I'm stumbling across myself. Just because they're checking those books out doesn't necessarily mean that it's imminent. But also, like I said, Bert Nash is located in Douglas County in Lawrence. If any of you guys have any questions and feel like you want to contact them and discuss mental health first aid.
That's a great piece of advice. We actually provided that training for our librarians, quite a few years ago now, and I had forgotten some of the advice that we got there. That training is really, really valuable for libraries. So I would encourage you to do exactly what Jessie just said, and check that out.
Becky,
all right, yes.
This is Irene Spiller from Leavenworth.
Yeah.
My question is, what are the legal ramifications of something like this, such as the parent calling the library about, whether her child had checked out a book on suicide, and then later deciding to file a lawsuit?
That's a legal question that one of the slides coming up, I confess I am not a lawyer, and nor do I play one on TV. And for me, that's a legal question that I don't have an answer to. Most of what I talk about today has more to do with ethics and how we as librarians want to protect our patrons. And so I think that's a really good question. What I say a lot as I'm talking to trustees and librarians, in general, there are no library police. City councils, library boards, library directors can get away with nearly anything unless somebody sues. That's ultimately what it generally comes down to. There are very few laws. I know there are in the Cora laws, there's the exemptions for things, but it basically comes down to policy. And so for violating policies, and even for violating laws, until someone steps up and says, what you did is wrong, and files a lawsuit, there's nobody to stop a lot of those things. I know that's not what people like to hear, but I have used that quite a bit. It puts the libraries in a very difficult position, I think. Not that I want to be the library police.
But I think there are laws. I know there are laws in place as far as what kind of information a library can give out about books. I don't know what the laws are, but I think there are laws in place that a librarian cannot say, okay, these books are checked out to so-and-so, and you can't share those records legally. And I'm sure ALA. Okay, sorry.
That's coming up. Yep. Yeah.
There was an interesting question I think has come up before, and Robin addressed it, but if people aren't in chat, I just want to talk about it. Just about parents, or actually not even parents, the library stopping children from watching a rated R movie. And Robin addressed it, that there is, the library doesn't really have that ability. Mm-hmm. It's not their place. Mm-hmm. It's the parents' place. And it's same in the video, you talked about the video games as well. And we see this all the time. We happily have children in the library playing video games these days. And it's not on the library staff to monitor the content and to say this game's okay and this game's not.
Absolutely. Again, as our librarians started to say, you know, that's not our job. That we assign that responsibility to the parent. And if you don't want your child in the library playing video games, you need to keep them out of the library and make sure they understand they're not supposed to play those. You're absolutely right that we simply don't have the wherewithal to be able to do that, nor do we want to be making those decisions for those parents and really taking it out of the parents' hands.
Becky, I also wanted to talk a little bit more, and Williamsburg kind of brought it up because we had a law enforcement person, but this comes up quite frequently, especially having a background in being the technology specialist back in the day. You know, often libraries are kind of an arm of the city, as is the police department. And so it's pretty natural, you know, we know these people. And so it's, you know, you have a police officer whom you know come in and ask you for some information. And so it's quite often we think, oh, we're on the same team, I need to help them. But actually, so often we're at odds with law enforcement. I hate to put it like that. Because, you know, we run into things where the law enforcement officers say, you need to turn off your Wi-Fi at night because there's a bad element and they're doing drug deals in the parking lot using your Wi-Fi. But that is at odds of us having the information be available to people even after the library closes. So
absolutely,
although we're often on the same side of the city and wanting the best for our communities, we don't always come at it from the same perspective.
That's a really good way to put it. And I've got sort of at the end some of the key messages, and that is that we're not trying to thwart the police department. There are things that they can do legally that will require us to turn over some of those records. A story that hopefully I have time to get through all of this here, but one of the things that happened, there was a murder in Dubuque, which is where I live, that happened. And in the car where they found a murder-suicide, I think it was, and in the car where they found it, there were library books that were lying on the floor of the car. They went to the library and said, you know, this is related to this murder suicide that everybody knows. We need to have the names of the people that checked this out. The librarian, very rightly so, said, no, I'm sorry, I can't give you that information right now. If you come back with a court order, then I would be happy to provide that with you. So there are laws in place that will allow us to provide that information and like you said, you know, be on the same team and give the law enforcement what they need. So there are laws that allow us to do that. But the very first response is, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that without the court order. So hopefully that helps clear up a little bit of that as well. Are we ready to move on?
I think we are. I just wanted to say, and Becky, you kind of alluded to this, you are not a lawyer or attorney, nor are any of the NECL staff. And that is why we have attorneys that we work with, so that they can give us information on this type of thing and that we don't lead you astray. So exactly. I have made a note to go ahead and poke Daniel Davey. I think she'd be the one. Oh no, I'm sending chat to the waiting room. No, terrible. Whoops. Okay, so we will get an answer on that and follow up with people so they have that information. We can move on though, I think, at this point.
Okay, great. So I hope, let's see what's the matter here. I'm not in the right place. Well, sorry about that. I've got to go back out and back in again. Good Lord. There we are. So moving on, hope you enjoyed at least some of those and caught a lot of the mistakes. One of the things I also kind of wanted to point out, and somebody did allude to this, and I haven't been really keeping up with chat, but the public space there, there was really no separation between staff and the public, and there was no good way that the young man who came in and asked about getting out of debt, it was obvious he was very concerned. He didn't want people to know about that. He kind of whispered the thing, and the librarian just announced it to everybody that was up there. There was no way for him to have a private conversation with a librarian. So I like to remind library staff in particular to think about the way your information desks are set up and make sure that people do have some modicum of privacy as they're approaching you, so that it's not just being shared out with everybody. So this is sort of what we were just talking about. It. Who cares if a librarian told his mom and everybody in the library that Ethan was there? Why does it matter that the librarian Megan told Anna that her neighbor checked out the newest Kristen Hanna book? Why do libraries protect the confidentiality of library reading records? This is something I learned as I was putting this together. There is no explicit right to privacy in the Constitution. We all just sort of assume that, but it's not really there. Where it comes into play is in the Bill of Rights, and it's implied rather than stated outright, even in the Bill of Rights. So protecting privacy kind of has three benefits. There's the benefit to the individual. We have freedom of choice, we have autonomy, we have a sense of personal space. There's also a benefit to relationships. With privacy, we can then exchange controversial ideas without fear. And then, of course, the third one is there is definitely a benefit to society. We build trust. We reduce the misuse of data. It also helps balance power between the state and individuals, and it certainly can help promote free speech. ALA and its members recognize that children and youth have the same rights to privacy as adults. Library users expect, and in many places have, a legal right to have their personally identifiable information and library use data protected and kept private and confidential by anybody that has access to that information. So as we move through here, I kind of broke these down into three pieces, which I talked about a little bit early on. There are societal reasons for keeping things private. There are legal reasons, and there are ethical reasons. So let's first take a look at the societal ones. Society really expects us to. Despite what it looks like, they really do expect privacy. Even though we post our private lives on social media and we carry our phones that track our every move. There was a study done in 2014, and the people who surveyed agreed with these following 5 statements. 1, individuals should be able to control who sees their personal information. 2, companies collect too much personal information. If you remember back to the video, they ask for your social security number. Number 3, government agencies should not share personal information unless they are authorized by a person or by the law. And that again goes back to libraries as government agencies. The last 2 have to deal with companies. And again, companies should not share personal information without permission. And companies should use the information that they collect only for the purpose that they've collected it. So I think those can be extrapolated for us to understand that libraries should also be considering those things as they're gathering information. So here's another one. It was a mobile user survey. It was conducted in 2019, and it did find some interesting information, I thought anyway. Younger generations are less concerned about data privacy than those from Gen X and Boomer subgroups, as you can see in the chart. But if you still go back and add these things up, over 50% of each of those age groups are either somewhat concerned or very concerned. Over 50% are concerned about data privacy. So even though there might be some things, and as we're skewing younger, they're not as worried about it. They are, at least half of them, somewhat or very concerned. So now let's head into the legal ones. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so I always recommend that you contact your city attorney when you have legal questions. This is not the place to depend on somebody's interpretation of what they think the law means. With that said, we're going to start at the top with the Constitution, because there is plenty of case law to help with that. So you remember I said the Constitution doesn't really guarantee the right, so we depend on case law and the Bill of Rights to secure that right. The First Amendment protects the privacy of a person's reading habits, their associations, and communications as an additional right necessary to give full meaning to the rights that are enumerated. You remember we talk about free speech, freedom of the press, belief, and assembly. That doesn't say privacy, but it's extrapolated out of there. in the communication piece. It protects the right to read and receive ideas anonymously without government intrusion or observation. And you can see what Justice Thurgood Marshall said and how he interpreted that First Amendment. The Fourth Amendment then protects the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fourth Amendment is another one that we use to talk about the rights of privacy. This gets a little bit into some of the legal pieces that are out there. So it may be a little deeper than y'all actually wanted to go right now, but I'm going to kind of read through what I found here. Opinions that were issued by the Supreme Court and other federal and state courts both recognize and protect the right to read and receive ideas anonymously. The Fourth Amendment and a Supreme Court decision are crucial in our current discussions of privacy in the library and the extent to which library users have an expectation of privacy. This is important because in order to determine the extent of the Fourth Amendment protection of that personally identifiable information, the courts rely on the U.S. Supreme Court decision Katz versus the United States, in that it held that the Fourth Amendment protects people, not places, and what a person seeks to preserve as private, even in an area accessible to the public, may be constitutionally protected. In the Katz decision, the court also reiterated that the person's general right to privacy, his right to be let alone by other people, is just like the protection of his property and his life. That was left largely to the law of individual states. So again, the Constitution doesn't say exactly what we'd like it to say. They say we're going to leave that up to the states. But in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, state constitutions, attorney general opinions, or state library confidentiality statutes do provide that protection. States created these confidentiality laws to protect the privacy and freedoms that Americans hold dear. These laws provide a clear framework for responding to national security concerns while safeguarding against random searches, fishing expeditions, or incidences of invasions of privacy. So now let's take a look at the Open Records Act. We all, hopefully, have heard of sunshine laws. Records that governments collect are open to the public. I know more certainly about the Iowa sunshine laws than I do Kansas, so I had to do a little bit of research here, and I borrowed heavily from the trustee manual, which we'll talk about in a second. But sunshine laws are there to protect private citizens from governments doing things in secret. So they are very much, we want those records to be open and available for public examination. And I have talked to library directors. If someone calls you, this is Iowa, I'm assuming that it also holds true here. If someone calls up and they want to know how much you paid for the carpeting that you put in the children's room, that is an open record, and you open your files and you give them that information. You don't get to say no, you don't get to say that's private, you don't get to say, I can't find that. That is something that you are obligated to give that person. And again, we are government agencies, and our government needs to be open and transparent. So that is at odds with our whole ethical piece of being librarians, and that we want to be able to protect those rights to privacy. So what states have done, and what is in the Kansas law, is they have made exceptions. So there are a whole raft of exceptions in Iowa, in Kansas, all across the country for records, government records that do not have to be given if somebody asks for it. So you can see on the screen two of them that impact libraries. Records which libraries are not required to disclose include, one of the exceptions is information about donations. So if the person asks for that to remain confidential, you do not have to give that information out. That is an exception under the Kansas Open Records Act. And then exception 23 is patron registration records and circulation or loan records which pertain to identifiable individuals. I couldn't find anything on this in Kansas, but I will tell you in Iowa, the law does not cover just giving a list of patrons to someone else. So if a Friends of the Library or a fundraiser or somebody else comes into the library and asks for a list of patrons, if there's no information that identifies what they're reading, what they've checked out, what they've talked to the librarian about, you are obligated to give that to them under Iowa law. I don't know for sure in Kansas. So what we really encourage people to do, and I'm sure Mike will talk about this later on as he's talking about policy, and I've got a few policy slides as well, that should be in your library policy. The law in Iowa does not protect those records with your name and address information. That becomes public record, but you can protect it at the policy level. So does somebody want to break in here and tell me if that's the same in Kansas or not?
Becky, I'm not sure on that one. I'm going to have to do some investigating.
Okay, I was just fascinated when I learned that as a librarian. Wait, what? I do have to get, but what we have instructed our libraries to do is put that into policy. So it is covered generally then. So this is a silly slide here. When I first started putting this together, the manual that I found was the 2016 Kansas Public Library Trustee Manual, and it had that really cool cover. And so I put the little cover up there. And then Dan told me earlier this week that it's been updated and there is now a 2020 version of it, but it doesn't have the same pretty cover on it. So I left the old one up there because it's so pretty. But we do want you to know that the manual was updated in 2020. Also together by the regional systems, and you can find it at systems.mykansaslibrary.org. So a lot of what I have on this slide is actually quoting to you from that. The Kansas Open Records Act, or KORA, requires originals of board minutes, library accounts, library resolutions, all of those things to be kept in the library for immediate inspection by a citizen. So again, that's the Sunshine Law. We have to keep those board minutes, the library accounts, that's your invoices and all the rest of it, all your library resolutions. Those are all open records and you need to be able to provide those to people. However, there are also exemptions in there that we talked about on the last slide. Other exemptions besides those two that might impact you at the library: personnel records. There are certain exemptions of things that you may not give out for that. So again, that's something you want to be thinking about when you're looking at those. Let's see, the circulation records we talked about. Another exemption is public records containing information of a personal nature, where public disclosure would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. That one seems really vague to me. My guess is there's some legal definitions there that I'm not aware of. And then there is an exemption for an individual's email address, cell phone number, and other contact information which has been given to the public agency for the purpose of public agency notifications. That may actually be the exemption in Kansas. We do not have that one in Iowa. So if you gather a cell phone number or a email and you're going to use it to notify them of their overdues, then that is exempt from the Sunshine Laws. It says an email address or a cell phone number which is given for notifications or communications. So I think that's probably the place where that's going to come in. But again, I'm not a lawyer. So check that one out before you totally go on that. So now let's look at some of the ethical things. This kind of goes back to a lot of the things that you saw in the video. No discussing of individual library users' readings. We all know that in our heads, but it's really hard when you're sitting at that desk and somebody you've known forever and you know she's neighbors with the other woman, and she comes in and she says, oh, she told me about this really good book. You know, what did she have? And it's second nature to just pop open that record and take a look. We have to school ourselves against doing that. And that's really tough, especially in small towns, I think. No sharing of records without court orders, same thing. Truant officer comes in, we want to be helpful, we like to serve our community, we think that kid should have been in school. So to share that information feels easy and natural, and we have to guard against that. We do not give that information out. Refraining from comments on usage, same thing. They're talking about their favorite books and, oh yeah, Mrs. So-and-so is in and she really enjoyed that one too. You know, that's another big oops. And then no discussion of personnel issues. Again, you saw that and somebody commented on that doing it out in public or in front of other employees is just absolutely wrong. I mean, we just have to make sure that we're not doing those. So the library profession has a long-standing ethic of facilitating and not monitoring access to information. Here's 4 of the items that I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these as we kind of go along here. Lack of privacy and confidentiality has a chilling effect on user selection, access to, and use of library resources. All library users have a right to be free from unreasonable intrusion into or surveillance of their lawful library use. Much of what I'm quoting here is coming from that one on the far left there, the privacy toolkit. I'm going to talk again in a second about those. We use the laws protecting the confidentiality of library records to assure that no person comes under suspicion simply because they read a disapproved book or do research onto a disapproved topic, because we want to make sure and protect our patrons from some of those other laws. Let's see, where am I at here? So if you want to delve into this subject anymore, these are the 4 sort of core places where you're going to find this information. The privacy toolkit is over 70 pages, I think, of information that helps a library walk through what do you need in your policy? What are the kinds of things that you need to do with the data you collect? How do you deal with cloud-based things right now and keep those secure? So there's lots of really good, it's getting a little old now, but there's lots of good information in that privacy toolkit. The second one is the Code of Ethics of the American Library Association. Again, not law. There's nothing that, if we break it, nobody's going to come knocking on my door. It was written in 1939. The last time it was amended was 2008. And again, we'll talk in a second about what the Code of Ethics says about privacy and confidentiality. The third one is the Library Bill of Rights. Again, it was adopted back in 1939. What I found really interesting is that the last amendment that was done in 2019 was to add I think it's the 7th, that comes up on the next screen, I think, that deals with privacy and confidentiality. So that was not in the Library Bill of Rights until 2019. That I found really interesting. And then the one down on the bottom there is a, I don't know, 15, 20 page document called Privacy and Interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights. And that was also amended in June of 2019. And it basically takes that very plain, simple document, the Library Bill of Rights, and it explains it and does it a little bit more in depth. So it's Article 7 out of the Library Bill of Rights. This is the one that was just added in 2019. It is the library's obligation to treat as confidential any private information obtained through contact with library patrons. That was one that nobody mentioned. Patron comes in and says, I'm going into the hospital. She's obviously friends with the librarian. She says, I'm going to the hospital, so I'm not going to be able to see you next week. And then the librarian shares that information with somebody who she knows that woman. She knows probably would want to know that lady was going into the library. If, as a librarian, I hear that information outside, whether I'm, it's my neighbor and she tells me over the front porch, or whether, we're sitting in church and she tells me there, or whether at the grocery store and she tells me there, that's okay. I can share that information if I feel like it. If I hear that information in the library, I cannot share that with anyone else in that community. So it's not just their reading records, but information that you get from your contact with those people who are in the library needs to be kept private and should not be shared. So that's the big one in the Library Bill of Rights. In the Code of Ethics, you'll see the actual Article 3 that's up on the screen there. We have to remember that confidentiality includes but isn't limited to things like database searches, reference interviews, circulation records, we all know that one, interlibrary loan records, other personally identifiable uses of library materials, facilities, or services. If we, one of the things that was in the video that I don't think we talked about, the kid comes in and he wants to sign up for a computer. and they've just got a little computer sheet. I mean, a little spreadsheet that he signs his name on it. The next person who comes in now knows that Matthew was on the computer from 2 to 3 on Wednesday afternoon. So keeping that information private is also something we have to be very aware of. The rapid pace of information collection and changes in technology means that the personally identifiable information and library use data are now at increased risk of exposure. The use of new technologies in libraries that rely on the collection, the use, the sharing, the monitoring, or tracking of user data comes into direct conflict with the Library Bill of Rights and our ethical responsibilities. Our things that we use all the time, ask our patrons, what's the last thing you read? We put it on Facebook. We do reader's advisory and we say, what are the last 5 books that you read that you liked? And I'll give you a recommendation of a book. That one, the patron has an option to opt in if it's on Facebook or something. But we have to remember that there are lots of programs and apps out there, databases out there that are asking for identifiable information about our patrons. And we have to be aware of those third-party vendors that are out there. So this document I found really interesting. Privacy and Interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights references some specific practices that you can put into place, and it uses something called NISO, the National Information Standards Organization. They are a group of people who have gotten together. It's publishers, libraries, software developers, and they try to make industry standards that allow everybody to work together. And so you figure, well, how on earth does that? I mean, it's things like, making ISBNs work, or whatever. That's what NISO works on. How does that deal with confidentiality? They actually put together a document where they they created standards for privacy rights. So again, publishers, libraries, software developers talked about privacy rights and put together some standards. So this document, this privacy document, uses some of those NISO standards. So I think that's another really great place to go to find information on what exactly you can do. So now that we know, yes, most of our patrons want us to keep their information private. There are legal reasons to keep it private, and there are ethical reasons. How exactly do we do it? Policy is the #1 way, and I'm going to check a time here. Yep, I think we won't probably go out there. One of my things as a library consultant is I don't want anybody to have to recreate the wheel. So I like to find really good examples of things and say, take a look at this, see what fits your situation, and use what you can from this. Just by happenstance, I came across the Multnomah County Library's Privacy and Confidentiality Library Records policy. It is really, really good. It is very comprehensive. It covers a lot of the things that you would want covered. And if we had time, I would take you out and just sort of run you through it. It's out on their website and easy to take a look at. One of the best ways that I suggest for libraries to do this is make sure your policy is good. So take a look at the Multnomah. What are the types of things that we have policies for in general, and this in specific? A policy makes sure that all of our users know what to expect. It makes sure that our library users are treated equitably and consistently. It ensures that library staff can communicate with law enforcement and other inquiries with confidence. They know what to do. When you have that in your library policy, your staff knows that they say no unless you have a court order, or they say, no, I cannot give that to you as a library board president because that's protected in our policy. It helps staff know the rules, and then we can also do training for new staff. Let's see. A privacy policy should communicate the library's commitment to protecting library users' PII, that personally identifiable information. A well-defined policy tells users how their information is going to be utilized. It explains the circumstances under which that PII might be disclosed. And so when you're putting together a policy, You want to make sure to consult your attorney to make sure that you are following state and federal laws that govern the collection and sharing of it. The very first sentence of the Multnomah policy says, let's see, where did that go? Multnomah County Library takes steps to protect the privacy and confidentiality of all library patrons, no matter their age. Then they go farther and they talk about what do we gather and who has access to that information. They talk about the Patriot Act. They talk about the security measures that they've put in place. They talk about the responsibility of the patron. Then something that I found really interesting, have never seen in another policy, they actually list their third-party vendors, their database suppliers, the app that they use for book checkout, and they link to those suppliers, their third-party vendors, to their confidentiality policies. Again, NISO has said, here's, vendors need to have these kinds of policies, protections in place. And so they have privacy policies, all those vendors do. And so Multnomah actually links to those third-party vendors. I thought that was really interesting. And then of course it talks about, what's illegal, what happens if you break the Multnomah policy, what is your recourse if you get kicked out of the library or whatever. I think it's a really, really good policy. I'm sure there are many others out there, but I felt like this one just had everything that I wanted to talk about. So libraries like data and information. We're really, really good at collecting it. But we need to consider the information that we have, and we've got to be very intentional about what we collect. Do you really need somebody's date of birth for a library card? Remember back to the video? It's not necessary to gather a social security number. And in fact, there are very strict rules about collecting and safeguarding those numbers. So we have to limit the degree to which that PII is monitored, collected, disclosed, and distributed. So this kind of breaks down the pieces of safeguarding it. Collecting. Avoid creating unnecessary records. Don't ask for it if you don't need it. Only record the information when it's necessary for the efficient operation of the library. It is such a standard practice that libraries don't create or maintain unnecessary records. So even our ILS, our integrated library systems, our checkouts, don't collect that information and keep it. Once I turn my book back in, it's erased from the memory so that nobody can come back in and find out what I checked out 6 months ago. What I'm finding, that was something I quoted from someplace else here, but what I'm finding today is patrons want to know what they read 6 months ago. And so many of the systems are now having a toggle that you can turn on. So if I, as a patron, want to keep track of what I had checked out 6 months ago, I can say, yep, I want to opt into this, and it will keep track of that for me. If I do not want that information collected or kept, then I say, no, thank you, and they automatically delete that. So that, I think, is a really interesting change since when some of this information was written and put in there. So storage. Libraries should conduct an audit of what PII is stored by the library, where it is stored, how it's being secured, and again, don't keep the records that you don't need. Make sure they're all covered by a policy. Include things like digital records, vendor collected data, and system backups. Our system backups probably have what was checked out by somebody 6 months ago. Do we need that 6 months later? What do you do with those backups? Consider that when you're writing your privacy policy. Access. Make sure that only people that need access to the information are able to get to it. Avoid practices and procedures that put information in public view. Like one of the things our librarian said in the video was, we'll send you a postcard with your overdues. So now the mailman and anybody who sees that postcard has the list of books that I checked out with my name on the other side. Postcards, which we all used to do, back before we started thinking about this. It was cheaper than sending a letter, so we mailed a postcard with that information. Answering machines are another big one. We call to say they've got an overdue or that their hold is in. If I leave the information that John's book that he requested on suicide is at the library for him to pick up, and I leave that on the home answering machine, that again, we have destroyed that trust that we have with that patron. So that's another one that we have to make sure, how are we doing those? What are we doing with access? A lot of libraries have started going to hold shelves, which are self-serve. So it's got a little bookmarky thing in it or a band or something so that I can go and find it and I don't have to interrupt a librarian and ask her to get it from behind the desk. If it's got my name on it, anybody can go up there and look at that. So they have done things like covering the books so that you can't get it. I really like, so many people are looking at lockers right now, and then you can have them outside and available 24 hours. There's some really cool stuff happening. Some people will do a code, and so when your hold comes in, you get texted a code that says, this is your code, and that's how you pick up the book, so it doesn't have my name on it. Some people will do a combination of, last 3 letters of your first name or last name or something like that. So there are ways to help protect that if you do have that self-service hold. But again, think about that idea of access. Reporting, we want to consider the personal information of our staff, of our volunteers, of our donors when we're working on putting together policies. Be thinking about your human resources as you're thinking about policy. And then retention and deletion. Libraries need to develop a policy for data disposal unless you're already covered by your city or county government. And frequently they will have that in their policy. So make sure you're aware of those and if you're covered with them. PII should be regularly purged, including information associated with library use, like we've talked about before. Physical records containing users' PII or financial information, if you're taking things with credit cards, there are some very strict standards on how you keep track of those, who has access to them, and how they're secured. And again, they need to be kept from public view. If they're physical records, they need to be shredded afterwards. A lot of libraries, I did it for years and years and years when I was a library director. You ask the patron to fill out the form, and then you keep those, or a card, and we keep them behind the desk. Once you've entered that into your ILS, there's no reason to keep those anymore. Maybe you need it for 6 months, but to shred those items after a certain amount of time should also be a part of your policy. These are just a couple of resources, not library specific, that I like to share with people. There is actually a group, let's see, what's it called now? I just lost it. Data Privacy and Protection Day is January 28th, and there's lots of really good information sort of around that week. The National Cybersecurity Alliance talks a lot about privacy and security. I think they're the ones that do this staysafeonline.org, and they're the ones that do that Data Privacy Day. And then the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse is another place, privacyrights.org. They also have a lot of really good information out there that libraries can utilize. Again, it's not specific to libraries, but it helps us with that. There's also something called Choose Privacy Every Day. That's another, I think that's actually chooseprivacyeveryday.org. And they also have a lot of great information. One of the things I don't think I've talked about yet, and I probably skipped right over that slide, libraries have 2 responsibilities. We are responsible for protecting our customers' data and the information that we collect. We've spent most of the hour talking about that. But librarians are also educators. And so using these and making sure that our patrons are aware of these, whether they're in the library on Facebook and answering the quizzes where you give your mother's last name and your, the street you grew up on, we as librarians also, as part of our ethical responsibility, want to help protect our patrons when they're out and on their own. So that education is a really big piece of that. And I didn't spend as much time as I really kind of wanted to talk about that. The heading on this, Your Privacy is Important to Us, is from a handout that I found from the Vermont Library Association. And I thought it was really great. I would recommend every library have a piece of paper that when people start asking questions about privacy and why are you doing this, that you can hand that to them. It answers these 3 questions. So the first question on this document that the Vermont Library Association put together is, the library is committed to protecting the privacy and confidentiality of our users. Why? The answer they gave, because we believe that freedom of speech is meaningless without the freedom to read. Confidentiality and privacy are essential to those freedoms because if library users have to worry about being judged, punished, ostracized, or put under surveillance, they then censor themselves. They may not seek answers to their questions or read the things they want to read, either in print or online. To be free and to govern themselves, people must be able to explore ideas, even controversial ideas, without fear. That's the answer that is on this piece of paper. So when somebody asks you, why do you guard this so strongly, there's the answer the Vermont Library Association has said you can give to a patron. Second question, if library users aren't doing anything wrong, why should they care about privacy? And I am sure at least the library directors in the room have heard this more than once. Who cares? I don't do anything wrong. Why am I worried about this? I alluded to this a little bit earlier. There are many reasons why patrons might want their privacy and confidentiality protected. Perhaps they have been diagnosed with a disease and want to learn more about it before they tell their children. Perhaps they are suffering from domestic or child abuse and want to find out how to get help. Or perhaps they're planning a European vacation as a surprise gift for their partner or parent. Privacy isn't about protecting people who are doing bad things. It's about giving our patrons the power to decide for themselves who will know about their reading and research interests. If a patron chooses to share her reading list with her neighbors, that's fine. But we can't assume everyone wants that. I really like that answer as well. And then the third question, but what if someone is doing something wrong and the police need to see their library records to investigate a crime? The answer to that, librarians comply with law enforcement requests for information about patrons as long as those requests come in the form of court orders. This ensures that a third party has considered whether the information is really critical for the investigation and helps prevent unnecessary invasions of privacy. I just think that document, that your privacy is important to us, did such a good job of explaining things for our patrons. Again, going back to that education piece. So I am going to sum up here. There are some key things that I want you to remember. And again, things that you can share with your community when you talk about privacy. Privacy is essential to the exercise of free speech, free thought, and free association. Libraries are a cornerstone of democracy and help ensure Americans are able to read, research, and think freely. Between state constitutions and attorney general opinions, all 50 states protect library records as confidential documents. The library community recognizes that children and youth have the same right to privacy as adults. And the last one, librarians have always cooperated with law enforcement within the framework of state and federal laws and regulations. So again, these are things that I consider key messages that you can share with your city government, with your county government, with your board of trustees, with your patrons, whoever it is that's asking questions about why do we do this. I think these are some of the key messages that we want to get across. So that is the end of my presentation. I got to check time. I'm always curious how I did. Ooh, I went a little long.
Thank you, Becky.
Sure. I want to thank the NECL staff and then also the trustees that are in the room. I know that as trustees, it's more than just showing up an hour a month at a meeting. So on behalf of the State Library of Iowa, I would like to say thank you for everything that you guys do. So I am going to stop sharing and you guys can get on with your session today.
Thank you so much again, and I hope you enjoy your time with your grandchild today. She mentioned she was going to do a little petting zoo next. So
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. So we only have about 15 minutes left, and so I will turn it back over to Mr. Mike McDonald, our system director, and he wanted to just talk a little bit more about policies and share a resource for you all. So Mike, please take it away before we send them home.
All right, thank you, Dan. Okay, so as we discussed today, some of your library's policies will address the topic of privacy and confidentiality. And I know that one of the resources that Becky listed through the American Library Association talked about a privacy audit. You know, this is useful in ensuring that the practical application of the policy is effective. The audit examines how the library collects, stores, shares, and uses or destroys information about library patrons. So any library that's interested in digging deeper into a privacy audit, please contact us and we can get you some additional information. I wanted to remind you that policymaking is one of your most important functions as a board. So I'm hopeful that you know how to access your policies either through your website, or maybe you are provided a thumb drive when you come on the board, and then that is updated as policies are updated. I would also recommend that libraries create a roster of policies that you and the director use. So this would be a list of your policies, you know, by name, and then the date that it was developed, the date it was last reviewed, and the date that it was last updated. A lot of times policy doesn't require an update, but you're reviewing it, checking to see if it does need some attention. And then you could sort of track that schedule so that you know that you've sort of touched each policy periodically. The library director and staff will have recommendations on how various policies should be shaped, but it is ultimately the board's responsibility to review and set library policy. And I think that's an important distinction to remember. Your job as board members, one of your big jobs, is to set policy, and then you put it on the director to develop the procedures that will be used to implement that policy. And this is also a great opportunity, and I shared my screen here. Hopefully you are seeing the NECLS homepage. We have an extensive professional collection of resources. So if you go under resources and come down to professional collection, Jesse Harris from our staff has put together these lists for you. And so this, if you were to click on this first link, it would show you all of the new items in the NECLS professional collection. But for today's training, she put together this list on privacy and confidentiality. And we have 6 titles in our professional collection that are really tied to what was discussed today. So these are available to be checked out. So check with your director, or I mean, you can get into Next and place that request. If you are a library that's not part of the Next consortium, your libraries can get that through us on interlibrary loan. And then I also, let's see, I also just generally wanted to let you know that NECLS is fully operational again. Our building has undergone a renovation, but all of our staff is back, and our staff is out visiting libraries again. So if you have certain needs that you'd like to have us come and meet with you about, we are prepared to do that. Some of the things that we do frequently, we facilitate strategic planning. We can talk to you about technology planning, assisting with weeding and collection development. We can come and talk to you on how to run a board meeting. Maybe you have a lot of new board members and you want us to come and just give the board an introduction to NECLS and the various services we provide. We are happy to do that too.